Chapter 15. A loud crack, accompanied with a bright flash of light, woke me. I felt as if I was falling while I glanced up at the tiny window in the ceiling and saw nothing but water rushing past. I panicked and hit my head on the ceiling as the tiny cabin rose and fell. When I felt around the bed, I noticed that Bruno had abandoned me, to find out what was going on, no doubt. My feet struggled on the slippery floor as the world seemed to roll around me. A dim purple light filled the tiny space and made it hard to see as I tried to find the light switch. I pulled my boots on, fighting the shift of the room as the boat was tossed around violently. I opened the door to my cabin and bounced off the walls, bumping into everything as I made my way through the galley toward the cockpit where Saul would be. The same purple light with the occasional flash of bright white light filled the rest of the boat's interior. Water was spilling in from the opening that led to the outside. "Saul!" I shouted over the deafening rumble of rain pelting the deck. "Saul, answer me!" I rushed to pull on my wet weather gear before going to meet him outside. I felt the boat roll over to the other side as it tacked into the wind. Just then, a very wet and terrified Bruno slid past me with sprawled-out legs and nails dug into the teak wood floor as he tried desperately to get a foothold. Lightning flashed again, outlining Saul, who was gripping the wheel. It put my fears that he had fallen overboard to rest. I strained to grab hold of the handrails on either side of the stairs as I pulled myself up and out of the cabin and into the cockpit. After slipping on the wet stairs, I eventually made it out into the harsh wind and towering waves that made it hard to see land. I found a very calm Saul at the wheel of the boat, with almost full sails out, just about dumping us out with every wave that hit the side of the hull. He barely noticed me as I took a seat next to him. "Do you think we ought to drop the sails and anchor and wait it out?" I yelled over the howling wind. "It's hopeless to try to continue in this." Saul looked at me, puzzled and soaked to the bone as he manned the wheel. He stood with one leg extended and the opposite knee bent to make up for the slant of the boat. "Hopeless? No, not hopeless. It's just a challenge," he shouted over the weather. "This is an ocean cruiser. It can handle a little storm even if you can't. You want to make good time and catch up with Lily, right?" "Yeah, but not die in the process," I answered, pulling the hood of my raincoat over my head to block what felt like sharp needles in the back of my neck. "There is no way Lily's boat will be able to handle this. I knew a guy who had one of those. It was a tough little thing, but not this tough." He turned the boat into the wind to avoid being broadsided by a wave, but instead buried the bow into it. For a second, the wave washed right over the top, but the bow popped out of the water, only to come crashing down once again. "I'm sure she dropped her anchor to wait it out close to shore. This boat can handle it, so can we. Keep an eye out for her. We just might catch up with her today yet." I looked around and could scarcely see anything but water around me. The rain was so thick and waves so high, I wouldn't be surprised if we sailed right past her without even knowing. "You worry too much," Saul said with a smirk. "Given a choice, I would rather die sailing than by the flu. Besides, I'm getting old. It's not like I have much longer to live anyway." "I still have a lot I would like to do before I check out, if you don't mind," I argued as I put on a life jacket and pulled the straps tight around my chest. My mind wandered as I imagined what would happen to me if I were to fall overboard in this weather. Would Saul even be able to see where I went? Could he turn around and reach me? Could I swim to shore? Or would I be pushed farther out? And where were we, anyway? "You'll never feel more alive than you do right at this moment." Saul clearly enjoyed every minute, hanging on to the wheel, fighting for every mile. I watched the mast, fearing it might snap under the stress, the mainsail's boom nearly dragging in the water. Even though it was midday, it felt closer to nighttime with all the cloud cover. The lightning that regularly darted across the sky looked like bony hands swatting up waves in our path. Our large sail was catching all the rain and directing it like a funnel right down at us. Every time Saul steered the boat into a wave, A little too much into the wind, our sails snapped back and forth like a whip thrashing water in our direction. I hung on the rail as the boat leaned. It came close to tipping down to the water every time the wind had a sudden burst of added strength. I left Saul to fight the wind as I pulled up the canopy to at least block a little of the weather from us. Like monsters, the waves kept growing and attacking us from all angles, not even fazing Saul and his determination. You should be grateful for the practice. Calm seas make poor sailors. The Caribbean is a long way away. Didn't you think you'd see a storm or two on your way down there? Saul shouted. Don't worry, we will make it through not only this storm, but many more to come. As he promised, it passed, leaving our deck washed clean of the dirt and grime. While I clung to the side, Saul continued to sail the boat at a faster pace than I would have comfortably attempted. With the weather a little more manageable, Bruno worked up the courage to make his way up out of the cabin and join us in the cockpit. He rested his big blockhead on my lap for me to rub his ears as we scanned the horizon for any signs of life, specifically Lily. Rays of light darted through the gaps in the clouds and lit up patches on the water that grew as the clouds broke up. The rain left the air smelling clean, free of the ash and smoke that I sailed through on my way up. I never trusted these things. Saul fumbled with the controls to the autopilot. He watched the wheel as it turned on its own, making its small adjustments. Finally convinced it wouldn't vary from the course, he darted below, ransacked the galley, and returned with a fresh bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. After I learned how to sail, I thought I was a sissy when I bought a boat with a motor. Back then you sailed off the buoy, no motor needed. Now they have computers that steer the boat for you. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey and slid one to me. Wait, what am I thinking? He barked as I reached for the one he offered. You're injured. No booze for you. He drained one of the glasses with a long swig, then coughed. With a voice that was noticeably coarser, he said, You should have seen the look on your face when you came darting out of the cabin. You looked like you thought you were going to die. I scowled in response and started to remove my first few layers of clothes, which were no longer necessary now that the storm had passed. 37 feet doesn't feel that big when you're getting tossed around like a rag doll, I said, as I tried to get comfortable. And you gotta admit, you have been known to be a little reckless in the past when it comes to stuff like this. Saul smiled as he looked away, no doubt recalling some of his past blunders. You don't get good at something like sailing without getting a few good stories along the way. I will admit it's nice to have a change of scenery, but time will tell if we made an error in judgment. My eyes traced the shore. And it will be nice not to have to keep a nightly watch anymore. A normal sleep schedule will be a welcome change. Says who? Your nightly watch is more important now than ever, Saul argued as he eyed the wheel nervously. We have a lot of miles to log. I can't always babysit the helm. Okay, but can't I take the day shift for a change? I asked. No. Why not? Because it's taken already. By whom? Me, he said plainly. I started to protest, but decided to attack the argument from a different angle. I should be resting, remember? Yes, you should. He took a long sip from his glass. Rest while you drive the boat. Figures, I relented. And when did you become so cynical? You should work on shaking that attitude before we catch up with Lily. Oh, I don't know. Maybe it happened gradually over the past 6 months or so while I was looking over my shoulder constantly. Or possibly when I got shot. Take your pick. You came up by me seeking isolation to survive, and likely the virus has died down some, if not completely. But I fear you may have also grown satisfied with simply surviving. I shot him an incredulous look. That's funny coming from you. Okay, I'll admit I've been a bit of a shut-in in the past few years. But I'm an old man, he added bluntly. And to be honest, I was starting to like the idea of you guys staying with me permanently. I'd even dared to hope maybe someday the sound of kids would fill the house. That was a dream your aunt and I had, but unfortunately one that never came true. I was shocked at his mention of kids and of my aunt. It was one thing he pounded in my head as often as he could, the fact that despite our best efforts in planning, time, the great thief, could snatch it all away from us at a moment's notice. It dawned on me that Saul had wanted a big family. Every time my mom sat me down to tell me about our family, she did so with an old book full of pictures of relatives. Despite the fact that Saul was distant when I was a kid, it always seemed like I had someone keeping an eye on me. Don't you think you're being a little presumptuous? Perhaps a little. A fool's hope, I know. But I've seen how you and Lily are together. I may be old, but I'm not dead. That future isn't as unlikely as you may think. But not for a long while, hopefully. You're much too young for that now. Your life should be a roller coaster, full of adventure and rich with uncertainty. A planned life is a boring life. He grinned and glanced around at our surroundings. Hints of the storm remained overhead, with the bulk of it headed over the horizon. The waves that had threatened to sink us seemed to calm somewhat, content with merely nudging us off course from time to time. This clearly qualifies, I think. What could be more uncertain than our present situation? Over his shoulder, I saw a glimmer of white on the horizon. There! Off the right side! I pointed to the white. Right side? He asked, as if I had just insulted him. Don't you mean starboard side? It's not left and right. It's port, starboard, bow, and stern. Who taught you how to sail, anyway? I'm sorry, I didn't think right side was that confusing, I replied, standing and reaching in a compartment next to the wheel where I put my binoculars. I think that might be her. I don't see anything. It was there for a second. I passed the binoculars to Saul. You can see these white sails for miles. She should be easy to spot when we get closer. With the wind dying off and becoming more manageable, Saul unrolled the rest of the Genoa and tacked, so we were on a course to where I saw the flash of white on the horizon. With the extra sails out, the boat leaned to a healthy 35 degrees, and the cables were once again humming with the passing wind. As usual, Saul was right. The storm had given us an edge and made it possible to gain on Lily before she reached the city. The white on the horizon was definitely a sail. Most likely it was Lily, but that we wouldn't know for sure until we got closer. At the rate we were gaining, we would have no problem catching her by sundown. She was still a ways off, and without a doubt she had full sails out to take advantage of the weather also. But her boat was simply not as fast. You realize, of course, once we get to the city, we will probably have to give the boat back, right? I said to Saul, making sure to keep an eye on the sails. Then I'll just have to buy one of my own. He smiled, pleased with the progress we had made. Watching Saul busy trying to squeeze all the speed out of the boat, I thought back to when I first arrived at his house. That Saul was a shadow of the uncle I once had. The same man returned after leaving the confines of the house he had shut himself in. Once he made the decision to leave all his regrets and old life behind, he slowly returned to his old self. This was how I remembered him years ago. Relief flooded over me at the sight of Lily's gold hair through the binoculars. What if we don't like what we find? What if the city is just another ruin? The few that survived mad and lawless? I asked, looking back at our wake, struck with a sudden pit in my stomach. The laws are still there. Always remember that. It's up to the people to decide to follow them, he said. Except for tax law. Those can go right out the window as far as I'm concerned. But whether a government exists or not doesn't mean we have to turn on each other like a bunch of animals. The man you met back in town was correct in that we have a chance for a fresh start. You have an opportunity to build whatever life you want, even now, in these dark times. You'd be a fool to think you're going to find things as they were. Neither of us fully understand the weight of what's taken place around us these past months. I knew leaving the safety of the estate was unavoidable, but somehow, leaving my little basement room, the endless forests and grounds and routine we were all settled into, was harder than expected. Saul's house had become a home, in many ways my first. But it wasn't so much the structure itself, more so the memory of the smells that would tease the air when Lily cooked, or the sound of laughter echoing from Saul and Lily's bantering off the stone walls during dinner. Memories made by people I cared for deeply. Now the house itself was a memory, a shell of what once was. In time, it would return to the neglected state it was in when I arrived with Lily, erasing any evidence that we were ever there. Lily was right. It would be far too easy to get stuck in a rut, content with just surviving, disconnected from the outside world. I longed to be able to put it out of my mind. I thought back to my life before the virus, going to work for a few months, followed by mindless travel. I went wherever the wind blew me, ignorant to how fragile our lives were, one simple event changing all that. I wonder if we'll ever recover from this. Saul turned toward me with a stunned expression. Of course we will. This isn't the first time something really bad has happened. I'll be the first to admit probably not to this scale, but history's path is littered with countless victims who were cast aside from events that changed the world. How many times has that phrase been tossed around? Ever heard of dengue fever? I shook my head and wondered if he was trying to cheer me up or depress me further. I'll give you $10 million if you can give me the name of someone you know personally who had it. No? Well, it kills 22,000 people a year, yet you don't really hear about it in the news. Why? I don't know. Probably because it's one of many events beyond our control that constantly flare up around the world. But the losses are there nonetheless, adding to the countless legions before them. Disease, war, famine have been thinning out our numbers since the beginning, but somehow enough of us always manage to pull through. Then start over. In time, even this event will be reduced to a page or two in some history book with a footnote at the bottom of the approximate death toll. Millions lost in a flash, and just as quickly forgotten. Saul sighed. His eyes were fixated on the boat we were slowly approaching. He adjusted the sails as we got closer and turned to intercept Lily's. Her white sails were almost orange in the fading light. Lily beamed with excitement as we approached and ran to the bow of her boat to prepare to toss us a rope. I stood on the deck ready to reach for the line, and for a moment, I wondered if her leaving was a ruse designed to force us to leave. I can't help but be skeptical. We've already lost so much. I realized I was worried Lily's optimism wouldn't survive whatever we found back at the city. I'm not sure surviving is really a blessing. Rest assured, we'll be joining those we lost soon enough. In the end, we all have the same fate, he said gloomily. No matter how many of us are added, the grave will never be full. So what's to be done? Just give up? I asked. No, of course not. That would be the easy thing to do, Saul replied sharply. It's much harder to press on. Do the one thing you can do. Which is? Remember them. His eyes were heavy as he repeated what he said to me once before, advice he never fully embraced himself. Cherish those we still have left. Find someone who can tolerate you, much harder to do than it sounds, and build a legacy. After all, in the end, it's our family that remembers us. The end. This has been Generations End, written by C.S. West, narrated by Matt Godfrey. Original music by Swan Productions. Copyright 2017 by O5 Productions LLC. Production copyright 2018 by O5 Productions LLC.